Hello and welcome to today's lecture. This is lecture 9. The lecture is on JavaScript, jQuery and AJAX, and I'm going to provide an overview of all of these. There's quite a lot of material in this, and I'm going to pepper it with demos, and so I hope you'll be able to get a sense of what's involved with full stack development, basically using JavaScript on the back end, JavaScript on the front end, and allowing your front end JavaScript apps running in a web browser to talk to servers or services that are also written in JavaScript. Of course, AJAX, and that's this way of passing information asynchronously between a client and a server. That doesn't just have to work with jQuery. We can use any other program, and I'll give you an additional demo using PHP as well today. So hopefully that will help you and get you on your way. So first thing I want to do is I want to show you a simple demo of the kind of thing we want to be able to achieve. So this is a typical search box you might have on a web service. And this allows me, this is essentially is a front end to a database of CD albums. Okay, so a music library. And I've used Bootstrap just to create this nice front end box and so forth. And you can see if you look at up here that I'm actually running this on my web server, which is localhost, and I have that running down here. Okay, so all my servers are here. We looked at this before, and you can see this is quite happily running away in the background. I have PHP running. I have my web server running, and I have a MySQL database running. And this is a very simple application. So what I want to do is I want to search my library. Now the library currently just contains 4 albums, okay, just as an example. Okay, so I'm going to search and I'll say so I'm able to search for these albums here. Okay, so I'm having a live update on my albums that are searched. So these are albums by band called Lieback. These are some of their early albums, Nova Acapella, Opus Dei and Volk. And I'm dynamically able to search these. So I can do N, so it just gives me Nova Acapella. If I just type V, it just chooses these ones because they've got V in there. So I'm matching the albums across this, and I'd be able to select the album and do something with that album. And this is a fairly standard activity that you would see when you use Google, for example. So it's able to interpret and handle the events that are happening here. And we saw JavaScript events beforehand last time. So every time I type a key, it uses and sends a request to a server and handles that request, finds the information in the database and sends the reply to us. And then I'm able to match and display whatever I find here. So it's a nice setup. And I want to show you how to do this. You'll notice that this is just a HTML file, but I'm calling it AJAX PHP, and you'll see that in the demos. And it uses PHP on the back end in order to be able to search the database. I think I have an example here called AJAX node.html, and this essentially does the same job. And I'm running it from a file here locally, actually. And I should be able to do something similar. And yes, it will work. But this is a different front end that's written in HTML, of course, but its backend accesses a node service, which is running on my server. And we look here, we'll be able to see that there was a whole bunch of requests that were sent by this service that was running on localhost 3000. So I have 2 servers running here. I have my regular web service running, which is a web server with XAMPP running on port 80, and that handles all the PHP requests. I have another server doing the same thing, running on port 3000, which is just a node application that's running, and you can see there's queries been made here to the database. And so the idea of today's lecture is to show you how we're able to pull all of these things together and get them working. Okay, and so it's quite a lot in there, and this is full stack web development, and you need to know how to do this, and this gets you set up for the rest of the semester. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and start again. Now, if you have any questions, you can pop them into chat there. I'll do my best to keep an eye and run with those. So we're in week 5, and this week is on JavaScript, jQuery and AJAX. And this will kind of finish all of the full stack stuff that you need in order to be able to do some web development for the second half of the semester. So it's about developing and practicing and working with these. Next week, we're going to look at some frameworks and we're going to look at some models associated with web development. And it's a bit more theoretical, and I'll give you a chance to be able to work with some of the demos that are here from this one. So, these are the concepts that we're going to look at today. I mean, there are AJAX and jQuery. And AJAX is this just asynchronous communication model that allows us to be able to communicate between the client and the service. And we should be making use of AJAX and jQuery where possible, and AJAX via jQuery as well. They'll really help with cross-browser compatible client-server applications. So we want to be competent in accessing and manipulating content using the client side, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we want to be able to access information that's in an online database that's behind some service. And then that can be written in whatever technology we like, okay? And it's fine, but we'll see that we can do this with Node.js, for example, and the database. And we're going to look at AJAX and jQuery, and we'll see some PHP as well in the next lecture, which are the 5 that come this evening at 5 o'clock, the 5 short lessons, a little bit more detail. So we're interested in database connectivity with a server-side JavaScript. So that's the first thing we're going to be interested in doing. And in order to make that happen, you have to review your databases. And you know that for this module, it was a requirement that you had completed a database course. So I'm not sure which database service that you would have used, but if you install XAMPP, okay, you have XAMPP installed, it automatically installs MySQL for you. And so when it does this, it allows you to be able to create a set of databases and access them using phpMyAdmin, which I have here on my server. So I have a few different database users set up. These are databases. Here are my databases. I have a MySQL database, a Node user database, and a phpMyAdmin, all that kind of stuff. So we're interested in this Node user database, which I would use for my examples. Now, every single student in the department has an online database associated as well with them, and we'll share that with you in the labs next week. I'll probably send you a Teams post to let you know about this. But so I've created this Node user. So I click on Node user to look at the database here. You'll see that I have a single database called CD set. Okay, and this CD set is a set of CDs that I can look at, and I can browse this. So this is like an online front end to a database, and you'll see that I actually have 4 entries. We have 4 entries for this artist Laibach and 4 albums. And you can see the structure of that table. It's an ID, an artist, a title, a category, the played tracks, release date, all that kind of stuff. Lots of information about that particular structure. So I can manipulate and access this database. Now, some of you may be a little bit rusty about doing this. So I have produced a very short video for you. Let me see if it's here. I have this video which I'll circulate, and it gives you a quick example of how to work with some of these online databases. So we'll show you how to do all of that stuff, and it's like it's a 10-minute, less than 10-minute review of using databases with phpMyAdmin. But anyway, for the examples, you need to be able to work with databases. So here we are. It's a simple one that we'll use. I'll give you the source code for this. I think, again, I should have all of the data for that available for you so that you can create this. Yes, so here's the database. Show you how to create that database. We can have a quick look at this, and you can see all of this data. So it's much the same. You will notice creating tables, adding or inserting information into the databases, creating indexes, primary keys, and all the things that you know and should know from databases already. Okay, so that's that setup. So we need to have that in place in order to be able to do the work. And again, it's something you should have done in an earlier module. Some of you more recently than others, of course, but you do need to know this. Okay, so you have to connect, query, and manipulate relational database tables using a program rather than just logging into a command line and or MySQL or whatever you used and issuing an SQL query from the command. Okay, I mean, you probably could do this here by clicking on the SQL tab, click SQL, you can select star, okay, and we can just do this. select everything from CD set, and then we can run this query, go button, and we can get all the results, okay? And we could filter them if you like. So, but we want to be able to do this within a program, okay? And within Node.js or within PHP or whatever, Python, whatever language you choose. So you can use it with Java, of course, as well. So we're going to look at server-side JavaScript and the principles that we apply to all other languages like Java, Python, etc. And for it all to work, we have to have a database server running, as I said to you already. It has to be at some host, has to have a user, has to have authenticated access, and to a database where we can actually do all this work. And as I said, everything that we do will work on a host, local host, and we're going to use MariaDB or MySQL, really, essentially, that comes with XAMPP as our database server. We've set up this user already, as I showed you, called Node user, and it has a password called Node user. I mean, obviously, if you're using an online system, you don't do it like this, but you know, for our examples, it's fine. And the database is also called Node user, so it's all very simple and straightforward for us. So in practice, we'd have to have very secure authentication, but this setup will do for examples, and this course is not about security. Okay? We haven't time to do security on top of all that stuff as well. We need to do. So you can use the command line tool MySQL or PHP-MyAdmin to verify everything is working before it works. I mean, PHP-MyAdmin looks very well. I mean, you can get to it from running this software here. Okay, so it's fairly straightforward to do that, and you can have fun managing all your servers. And here, and then you can just go to localhost when it's running. You can just go to localhost, and here we are. And then you can just click through to PHP-MyAdmin at the top right, and you're there. And you can create your databases, and it'll be fine. So it's a nice way to do this. But once the database is set up, you're going to have to access it using Node.js. You have to install a MySQL driver. And this is a MySQL module, and that can be downloaded and installed using npm. We've seen how to do this kind of thing already. We used HTTP and we installed this one, so there's no problem with npm. Once you install it, you can start using it in order to be able to manipulate MySQL databases. A little bit later, we'll be using MongoDB, which is a collection-based database rather than a relational database. And you know, we'll install a MongoDB and so forth, and package as well that allows us to manipulate that one. So there are lots of things that we can do very easily and straightforward by installing packages that are useful for us. So once we have this module in place, then we can use it to set up some authenticated connection to the database, and we use the create connection method in order to do that, and then we use the connect method to be able to establish the connection. And you can look at this demo here. So here's a very simple Node.js application. We create a variable called MySQL, and that requires this package, and it allows us to be able to access the database. Then we set up the connection, and we've told it what the host is, what the user is, and what the password is. Okay? And that's it. Now, we haven't actually told it what database to access here, but we could do that as well at some point, which database we want to use. And then, you know, we can connect, and if we can connect properly, we get it connected, and if we don't, we get an error. And so that's fairly straightforward to do. I have a piece of software in demo1.js that allows us to be able to do this. Let's have a look at them and demo1.js. Where is this? It's in the file. Go to here. Okay, so demo 1 is here, so we'll just look at this. Okay, and here we can. So this allows us to be able to connect to our database with this password and tell us whether we're connected or throw some error. So let's have a look at doing that. We do node, clear this node. Very exciting. We're done. Okay. so that's fine. Okay, and that works. That works. And we have a demo 2 as well, I suppose, that does something a bit more interesting, does it? We can, once we've done that, we can issue an SQL command using the query method, and that will allow us to be able to query something, okay, and be able to do something with this. So it takes a string as an SQL, calls the callback function, and then when we receive the result, we can play with that result. So let's have a look and see what demo 2 looks like. Okay, so here we have a more interesting one. Okay, so this is our connection yet again here, and we move down. We be able to say here now we want to be able to select from the CD set. So what's happening is that we want to be able to query the database that we know is running and behind this database, and all this stuff here is about opening the connection, closing connection, and throwing the results out. So let's have a look and see what it does for us. Okay, so Okay, and what happens is we get all the information back. Now, might not be the same way as we've seen it, but all of the data came back. So we logged into the database node user, query was successful, and we output all the data that we retrieved. And you'll see that this data here are the data that were sitting in the online database here. So we were able to use a program to log in, get the information of the database that's located anywhere on the web, as long as we have authentication in place, and we can pull that data back into our program. And when it's in our program, we can do all that fun stuff. And this is, exactly how online shops work, online stores. You go to shop, you want to say, show me all of the shoes that are available in this color, black, of course, and then you say, show me all the black shoes or black boots, and then it searches the database, finds all the black boots, and then you can filter to see which ones are in your size, and then you look and say, can I buy this? And this is fundamental to how all of these online stores work. Okay, you want to buy tickets for a gig or something like that, exact same way. Okay, everything works in the same basic principle of having a database backend, having some middleware that sits in front of that database, provides that service, so you can do all these requests, maybe services to purchase stuff, all that in place, and then you have the front end that shows and displays and makes it all look good. So that's how this stuff works. Okay? So you don't need to okay, so you can use the driver to perform all of the database manipulation that you would like to be able to do. You don't have to watch the privileges for these examples of this course. You don't want them to, but you should really think about it. You don't want users to be able to create tables and all that kind of stuff. So I've set it up so that you can only just query. You can't create data unless you're a different kind of authenticated user. Anyway, so the data that comes back, it looks like it's JSON, okay? But is it JSON? Okay, so here, for example, is information coming back from the program that we saw a few minutes ago, this kind of program here. There's also a demo called Demo 3 that you could look at. So what is this? It looks like it could be JSON, okay? Could be JSON, because it's just basically, it looks like this because we used the console.log to print it. And it returned an array of raw data packet objects from the low-level MySQL driver, and the output's not JSON. We didn't use a JSON serializer to actually do that, but we could actually try that if we wanted, and we see it. So raw data packet is the name of the constructor function that creates this object, and it looks like this: a new row packet ID, etc., etc. And you can actually play with all those and access all of the results individually and start manipulating them and working with them. So we can get lots of other information from like the query, but we don't need to do that. But basically the data is here. And I guess all you need to know is that we're able to access not just the data, but the rows and the individual items and play and work with those. So it's not just coming back as some kind of string. It's coming back in some way that we can interact with the individual attributes of each row or element. Okay, so that's nice to see. We'll have a look at this. And so we can see now, if we go back to our programs, we can see the data that's here. We can pull them all back using these. Let me have a look at number 3, and we'll see what number 3 does, just to be honest. Missed out on anything? Just another thing. Okay. So now let's print. Okay, so what demo 3 does? Okay, so let's go back and have a look at demo 2 first. Okay, let's look at demo 2 again. Well, we know it just generated the data like this. So what I wanted to do now is I wanted to use demo 3 to actually show you how you could play with these data. So I'll clear the screen. Okay. Yeah, so I was able to take the data this time on the output and play with it a little bit more. Okay, I was able to do and make it look a little bit different. So now it really is JSON for playing with, and this is the original raw packet information. I think I have it set up so that I can do more fun stuff with this. Have a look at this. I set it up to do, oh, fancy HTML. Yep, we can do some fancy HTML, so we can actually print it in HTML as well. So we can edit to print the HTML. So I'm going to change this. I'm just going to take the comment out, and I'll just use this comment here. And now I'm going to run this demo again and see how we can access the various information and change our display. Okay, so we were able to look at HTML around all that information as well. So we were able to print it as JSON. We're able to print the raw data, and we're able to output it and access it and print it as HTML. We can put this into a document, load it, and it would be all quite nice. Okay, and we can style the information that comes back. You could take this, copy it, and let me just copy this. Let's go to Atom, create a new file, pop the data into this file here, and let's see if we can view this as HTML. Previously, does it actually look nice? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So it's not doing anything properly because I don't have it set up as proper HTML. But you could do that if you. Okay, so that's really it. And I guess if we want to really understand what's happening, we have to go in and look at the actual code and see what's happening. So we're able to access the individual items that are here. We're able to pull out the individual items that come back from a record, get the title, for example, and to be able to get all sorts of other information. So it's easy to do. And I guess there's a demo code and it will work for any database that you want to play with, as long as you know the database name, the login details, and so on. So that's it. Have we any questions there? Apart from loving a bit of LiveAct now and then, don't we all? So that's fundamental stuff. And I guess if you'll see some more of this in the little short lessons that come a little bit later in the day for you. Okay. So let's now have a look at some AJAX. Now, if we think for a minute, if we go back to our original demo, and I showed you this demo here, where we were able to access this. So you can have a sense now of what's happening. So we're able to take the data from the input box here, okay? Take data from the input box, and then wrap it up in a query that we send over the network to a database, which is able to a Node.js application that's running. Then that Node.js application is able to query the database and come back in. And we've seen all that backend now in place with those demos. So it's able to read that. So we want to now combine that backend reading the database with and turn it into a service. So that means we have to set it up like a HTTP server in front of it, so that then we can take requests to the server to query the database and come back and send the information back to our client. So we're building up all the little steps that we would use to be able to build this full stack of the client, the middle, the server, the database. Okay, and that's very straightforward to do as well. And we'll see this now. But it hinges on AJAX. So one of the reasons we went through all of the Node.js and MySQL integration in the last section was we want to be able to access JSON content. It could come from a static file or some dynamically generated from a database. We want to be able to get that from our clients that are written in HTML or CSS and JavaScript. I had a really good question in one of my CS353 question labs yesterday. And I know many of the CS353 students are also taking CS230, but the software project. But this student was asking me about, like, well, why can't we just take things from a file? Okay. We've lots of content in a file. Why do we need to access a database? Well, a really good question, especially if the data are small, but the general principle is that, when you start working in this kind of stuff and you may have millions of records, you don't download the file. You'd have to download or slurp in the whole file and access it and query it. And so we don't need to do that. So we can handle all that work by a specialized database. And also, we might want to update the data, and it's much easier to update a database, which is a random access, essentially storage, rather than a file, which is serial storage. And really good question, but sometimes you have to get back and think about this. It's really, really, really important that you do this. So up until now, we've been working with the client-side JavaScript only to process JSON data that was created on the client side directly from strings. So we can do this on the server side also. So once we have the data structured using JSON, we can actually easily generate JavaScript objects, and then we can have fun playing with the data. So what we can't do yet is to dynamically ingest the data, the JSON, from a source outside of the currently running app. And I just wanted to quickly show you, some of you have seen this already. For example, I have some And I'll develop this example a little bit further as well. Many of you know that I'm very interested in collectible card games, and I play a lot of these games and have done forever. And so we have a project for our CS230 students who are working on pack opening and managing a database of decks and cards in a CCG. So this, for example, is an example of how we can use pure CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and some jQuery, which we'll see just at the end of this class. So week 5, this is purely done with this. So for example, I'm starting and creating a new card game, and we can have nice hovers with this. All of these are done with SVGs and manipulation. So I can open this card and see the card, randomly generate the card from, and these ones don't do much, but all of this, random cards, that were generated, all sorts of fun stuff. This is all nicely done with just very simple CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and JSON, okay, to manage the data. And we can start again and do all this work again. So I'll give you the code for this as well. It pulls together a lot of the, a lot of all the stuff that you've been doing. There's only about 400 lines of code there, but there's lots of styling. There's lots of JavaScript, and you'll see some JSON sitting in the middle of all of this as well, where we use to generate and represent cards. So it's something that you could play with a little bit later as well if you wanted to get some more experience. I'll give you the code for free, and I'll make a small demo as well, describing how it works. But what we want to do, so we have to have a way to update the contents of a div element from a source on a server rather than a source internally in our program. That can be statically or dynamically generated JSON content. So we do that using AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So like JSON, AJAX is not a programming language. Okay, it's a technique for accessing web servers from within the web page using JavaScript. So for example, we can use AJAX if you want to look at the W3 Schools tutorial to update a web page, request data from a server, receive data from a server after the page is loaded or before it's loaded, send data to a server in the background. It's really, really powerful functionality. It allows us to write complex client-server HTML, CSS, JS apps. For years we didn't have this, and it was much, much more complicated. So I think we in a better place now, and it's definitely worthwhile learning and using. So there's a way to do traditional AJAX, okay, and that's using vanilla JavaScript, and that's something that you probably very few people will do nowadays because they all use frameworks like jQuery or React, or Vue, or whatever you like, whichever your preferred one is. I tend to do stuff from the basics, and because it's a bit more universal, and it's close to getting to understand what's actually happening, and that's really key for this course. Okay, so what we want to be able to do is we have a document here called load. We have a function called loadoc here. What it does is it loads a document. So we have this page here, the script. Okay, it's just a HTML document. You can see it's a HTML document. And in this document, we have a div called demo. And what we want to be able to do, its ID is demo, is we want to be able to click this button and load the document content. So we want to change the structure of the page after the page has been loaded. But the content of the document that we want to change is not just it's loaded from a file, it's loaded on a web server. Okay? It's getting it from somewhere. Okay? Or it could be from a file or anywhere. So it could be trying to load it and so forth. So we're trying to load this document. So the file that we want to actually load is this one here, which is just some HTML. So the trick is we load this file. It has a div that has this text here needs to be overwritten with the content from this, which is located in a file somewhere else. And that's what AJAX allows us to be able to do. So this information here is going to be stored in this file called ajaxinfo.txt. It's going to be on a server, and we're going to update it, and then and that's how it works. And it works using this function here. So we want to know what's going on. So we essentially everything hinges on being able to make this or using this function that's built into the DOM for us. Okay, and remember the DOM is the document object model, and this is XML HTTP request. And it has various states that as soon as we make the request and when it's finished, it executes this callback and it checks the state and the status and make sure everything is okay. And if in other words, if we make the connection and everything is good and we manage to get the data, then we can actually execute this line of code here, which essentially updates this div element, it's HTML, with the contents of what was returned from the document file. And that's it. Okay, so we open making a GET request, this file, send it, and then once we get it back, this function is called. So it's event handling. So everything is handled around events. And you know that everything has to be handled using event handling with a lot of this JavaScript. Now you'll see that front end, back end. You go back to this demo that I did here. You know, when I was opening here, I don't know which pack I'm going to open first. You know, I mean, it could be any of these things. You know, I could start it. I could open a pack here, 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 here. Start it again. I can start opening them as soon as they come. You know, I can start to come along. You know, I can do any of that stuff. So it's all asynchronous. We don't know what users will do. So everything has to handle on callback functions. So we say, when this task is completing, call this function. Don't just sit around waiting for it to happen. Really important that we. So you shouldn't be worried about the use of XML in the name AJAX, okay? It might use XML to transport data back and forth, but it's common to transport data just as plain JSON, which is what we're interested in. So it uses a browser built-in request object to request the data from the server, and it uses JavaScript and HTML DOM to display or use the data. AJAX also allows web pages to be updated asynchronously by exchanging data with a web server in the background. So it's possible to update parts of a page without reloading the whole page, and it's really nice to do that. For security reasons, modern browsers do not allow access across domains. This is important, that both the web page and the file that it tries to load must be located in the same place. So we can look at it from localhost. Have I got it here? Demo here? So here I have this. Here's the file. Okay, so I've loaded this file that we had. I want to change the content. So I've got the file on. I'm going to change the content by clicking this button here. Nothing is happening. Clicking this button is not happening. We know it's not happening because we can actually go and look at the JavaScript console and see all the errors. Okay, loads of errors here. Okay, not allowing us to do this because it's telling us it can't load it from the local host because the file I'm opening is actually on the file. So it means that the origin of the two documents are different. So in other words, this origin, the original file, is on a file that I've loaded, but the document I'm trying to access is coming from a server here. And it doesn't allow that because it's a security risk. So what we really need to do is we need to be able to access this file that sits on the web server. So I can change it. I can just change this to be localhost. So now I can change the content. No errors. And it worked just fine. And that's because the file that was used to make the call and the file that was loaded were on the same server. It's got to do with cross-origin, making a cross-origin request. Okay, and it's crucial, and I ask exam questions about this. We'll come back to it a little bit later. It's called cross-origin resource sharing CORS, and it's a specification that allows cross-domain communication from within a browser. And I'll go into it in some of the next lecture lessons, but it's useful to know why it works and why it doesn't work. So the steps are: an event occurs on the web page. Page is loaded, a button is clicked, something happens. The request object is created by JavaScript. The object then sends a request to the web server. The server processes that request. Server sends a response back to the web page. Response is read by JavaScript, and an action happens, and that's performed by JavaScript. And that's all there are to AJAX. You can have a look at W3 Schools if you wanted some more detail. So there's a lot happening in the code that I showed you. You could copy and paste without actually know what's happening. So, you know, is this a synchronous or an asynchronous request? Can you make both types of requests? Use a get method. What is it? Is that the only way to do it? Can we send data to the server as well? What's a post request? All web communication via the browser utilizes HTTP, as we've seen before. So it'd be unsurprising to know that this XML HTTP request handles things so that proper protocol requests are observed. All it's doing is automating the manual communication that we saw in class a couple of weeks ago, where I was taught the keyboard and I was typing netcat and I was typing in the commands manually. I didn't use get too much or go into too much detail, but that's all that's happening. We used get to get a document, and it does that, facilitates data sending to the server using a post request or post verb, and we have a look at those a little bit later as well in the next lesson. Okay, and as I said, I'll show you the demo that we had a look already. So now we have a sense of what's going on when we look at these code here. We can quickly look at the code for these so you can see what's happening. Let me just load up this document. So that's the document we wanted to load. This is AJAX node. And so here's a HTML request. And we can see that we're actually making the call, except we're not making the call. Where is it? It was demo 4, wasn't it? I think it was demo. It was demo 04. Okay, let me go and open demo 04. And that's the program we've just looked at. Okay, it's fairly straightforward. It's pretty much a straight copy here. So if we look at the demo here, which is also using AJAX to make these requests, then show you the code for that, and it's AJAX PHP. But let me just stick with the node one. Node. Here's the node. Now, what's happening here is that I'm essentially doing the exact same work. So here's our div element, and it's our search box. And as we're searching, I have an event setting up that's able to search something based on whatever I've got. And you'll notice that this particular time, actually, you're not seeing this XML HTTP request object anywhere in here. And that's because I'm using jQuery. So that complicated setup that I was looking at earlier has been replaced with jQuery, and I'm making a post request here to the server in order to be able to send it the information I want to query the database with, and then it sends me back the data, and I'm able to manipulate those data and play with them. So I did this. If I look at PHP, I'm making the same call, but this time I'm calling a PHP request, and I'm able to do all of that work. PHP document handles requests from the database. This is how we can connect the database with PHP. And this is the AJAX call from HT. This is the service that's called, written in Node.js. It's a little bit longer than the PHP one, but it's essentially doing the same work. You can see things like getting the data from query here, generating HTML, same, getting the data, querying it, displaying it, and sending all this information back, calling service, client, and then the client is responsible. So lots of fun stuff going on there, and you can have a look at these at your leisure, but I'm using jQuery. So let's have a little bit of understanding of jQuery. So jQuery is a JavaScript framework. And this framework is to make it easier to use JavaScript on your website. Okay? It takes a lot of the common tasks that require many, many lines of JavaScript code to accomplish and wraps them into very simple methods that you can call with a single line of code. So jQuery simplifies a lot of the complicated things like AJAX calls. It also contains the following features: HTML and DOM manipulation, CSS manipulation, HTML event methods, effects, UI manipulation, animations, AJAX utilities. The example that I looked here, everything is happening with jQuery. So it's lightweight, write less, do more JavaScript library. There are lots of other libraries, but jQuery is like long and established. I like it a lot, and I use it in this model. So it's this framework. It's cross-browser compatible, and it's very straightforward to use. So you'll notice that when I play with browsers, I have Safari Technology Preview, I have Safari, I have Chrome, I have Vivaldi, I have Firefox, I have Opera. You don't know what users are going to use. when you write a piece of software and apply it on the web. And this is just on my Mac. So what about the versions of those that run for Windows? All the versions of Windows. What about all the versions of these apps, browsers that run on mobile phones? All the different kinds of mobile phones. So when you write a piece of software, you want to be sure that it will work everywhere. So the likes of having a jQuery library for manipulating the DOM, and all the DOMs will be different for different browsers. It means that it allows us to be able to do it in the exact same way. So we write the code once and it'll work on all of these browsers, on all of these devices, on all of these operating systems. That's why we have React, for example, as well. And so there's lots of these. This is why we use it. And you can use it and include it as an external library. So you can either have it downloaded or include it yourself, or you should use something like the Microsoft or the Microsoft APIs or the Google APIs so that you can actually pull it down and get the most from the server. If you do this, then it's going to be cached and you don't have to load it every time. Okay, so everybody uses this kind of thing and it's cached and it makes life a whole lot easier for everybody. So the syntax for jQuery is tailor-made for selecting HTML elements and performing some action on those elements. So the basic syntax is a $bracket selector and what the action is, and it's just a method. A dollar is assigned to define that it's a query, access jQuery. The round brackets is a selector, is queries or find some HTML elements, and a jQuery action can be performed on all of the elements. So, for example, you can say $this.hide hides this element. $p hide hides all of the paragraph elements. $test.hide hides an element with a particular class called test, and hash test.hide hides a specific element with an ID test. And I'm doing all that kind of stuff with the source code for these. Okay. We saw on an example, and we know from our programming experience that we cannot process DOM elements until they're created. Okay? And they have to be accessible to the DOM. So we often see this onReady event handler in the body element of HTML documents that specifies a function to call when the DOM is ready, so when everything is loaded. Okay? As jQuery accesses the DOM elements, okay, using CSS selectors, we have to ensure that the jQuery functionality also happens when the DOM is ready. So we accomplish that using either of the two following here. So we can do document.ready, some callback function, and all the methods go in here, or we just say $function and all the methods go in, whichever you prefer. Okay, it's a bit harder to read, a bit more, makes a bit more sense, but it works just fine. Any of the code that's inside the document.ready will run once the page is ready and when and it's allowable to run the JavaScript. You can also have code inside $window.onload, and that runs once all the entire page, the images, and all the frames and everything are loaded, not just when the DOM is ready. And experienced developers sometimes use this shorthand notation, just $brackets, instead of that. Okay? So if you're new to jQuery, begin with the long form until you get used to it. And you can always pass a named function here instead of passing an anonymous function. So for example, here's a function called ready, function jQuery, that runs when the document is ready. And we can actually specify it, or we can just do it like this, window.load ready, or we can just load it like this. And you can try these, and you can look at the Learn jQuery Learning Center online as well. If you click through on the link, it's pretty good. Some really nice jQuery stuff. Lots of questions, and I recommend using this site. So jQuery is beautiful as well because when it comes to handling events, and handling events are a bit like this. Clicking, that's an event. Here's an event, hover's an event, clicking is an event, there's another event, all that stuff. These are all event handling. And it's one of the nicest aspects of the library because it makes the process easy and consistent across all different browser types. Okay, so it provides the high-level bind and unbind methods, functions, and that they allow us to generically attach and detach event handlers for matched set elements. So it's easy to attach events to something, like the click handler, for example, that's all really nice. Most of the common events like click, key, mouse events, they've all got a dedicated handler like .click, .mouse down, .change, .key down. And jQuery event handlers just take the function as a parameter and it tracks the handler so that you can unbind them later. It's really nice to be able to. I actually think it's look, we can spend a whole module just working with jQuery. It's just the beginning, okay? And we're not going to do all that. So I'd recommend you just give it some attention. There are lots of resources available. Some are linked in the document. You don't have to use jQuery. It makes life a lot harder for you, I think, but you could use some jQuery. But you know, sometimes I write stuff in pure vanilla JavaScript and don't use any jQuery at all. So you can use whatever you want. I mean, some people use React, and you can use this as well. It's fine, but ensure that you actually understand what you're doing. Don't just copy the code and hope that it'll work. You have to actually show some sense of understanding how it will work. Much of the way jQuery works has nothing to do with jQuery at all. It's just a way of programming with JavaScript, which is a multi-paradigm language. It's not like jQuery is a different language. jQuery is JavaScript, you know. So, and most modern programming languages fall into two categories. So they're imperative or procedural languages and declarative called functional. And JavaScript allows you to be able to use either or both in the same application. Really nice article here. What are the different programming paradigms by D. Austin? You can do object-oriented JavaScript as well. I know many of you do this already. Worthwhile having a peek. Thanks again for coming along. Lots of examples. All the demo code will be available. I'll upload everything a little bit later today. And of course, the lessons for this evening will be there too. And so I hope you have a sense of the power of full stack programming with JavaScript. And I'll see you in the labs. Thank you very much for attending.